mansion's intercom buzzed at exactly 7 in the morning. Richard Chen, one of Boston's wealthiest tech entrepreneurs, opened his front door expecting a delivery. Instead, he found his new housekeeper Maria standing there, her eyes red from crying, clutching the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Before Richard could ask what was wrong, Maria's voice trembled as she spoke words that made no sense. "Sir, that boy lives in my house." Richard stared at her, then at the child beside her, confusion flooding his mind. What boy? What was she talking about? The child standing right there was holding her hand. If you love stories that restore your faith in humanity, you're in the right place. Please subscribe to Sage Stories and hit that like button. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Now let me tell you what happened next. Richard Chen had built his fortune from nothing, transforming a small software startup into a company worth hundreds of millions. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a sprawling estate in the suburbs, luxury cars, and staff who kept his life running smoothly. But after his divorce 3 years ago, the mansion felt emptier than ever. His ex-wife had taken their daughter to California, and now he rattled around in 8,000 square feet of space, working 18-hour days to avoid feeling alone. 2 weeks earlier, his previous housekeeper had retired, and the agency had sent Maria Rodriguez. She was quiet, efficient, and always arrived exactly on time. He barely knew anything about her except that she did excellent work. That morning, though, nothing about Maria seemed familiar. Her usually neat hair was disheveled, her uniform wrinkled. The boy beside her wore clothes that had seen better days, his sneakers held together with duct tape. Richard stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Maria, I don't understand. What's going on?" She took a shaky breath, switching her grip on the child's hand. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry to bring this to your door. I didn't know where else to go. This is Tommy. He's been living in my spare room for 3 months. She paused, her voice breaking. "The boy I was talking about is named David. He lives in my house too. But this morning I found out David isn't who I thought he was." Richard led them to the kitchen, his mind racing. He'd heard of people taking in foster children, but something about Maria's distress suggested this was different. He poured her a glass of water while Tommy sat quietly at the table, his eyes taking in the granite countertops and gleaming appliances with wonder. Maria's hands shook as she began her story. 6 months ago, she explained, she'd been taking the bus home from work when she noticed a boy, maybe 13 years old, sleeping on a bench at the station. It was late October and the temperature was dropping. She thought about walking past, about minding her own business. But something made her stop. She woke the boy gently and asked if he was okay. He said his name was David, that he'd missed his bus and was waiting for the next one. She gave him money for a ticket and went home. But the next night he was there again, and the night after that. Finally, Maria had asked him the truth. David admitted he'd been living on the street since his mother died 2 months earlier. He had no other family, and he was terrified of going into the foster system after hearing horror stories from other kids. Maria's small apartment barely had room for her, but she couldn't leave a child out in the cold. She brought him home, gave him her spare room, and enrolled him in the local middle school. Her salary as a housekeeper was modest, but she stretched every dollar to feed 2 growing boys, because 3 weeks after taking in David, she'd found Tommy shivering behind a dumpster near her building. Tommy's story was different but equally heartbreaking. His mother was alive but deep in addiction, disappearing for days at a time. At 7 years old, Tommy had learned to fend for himself, scrounging for food and sleeping wherever he could. When Maria found him, she couldn't turn away. Now she had 2 boys depending on her, and she was drowning financially but managing somehow, until this morning. Maria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Mr. Chen, I woke up and David was gone, just gone. His backpack, his clothes, everything. And on my kitchen table, he'd left $3,000 in cash and a note." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. He wrote that he wasn't homeless. He'd been testing me. His father is Marcus Webb. Richard's breath caught. Marcus Webb was a name everyone in Boston knew. The billionaire investor had made headlines. 6 months ago when his wife died suddenly, Richard had met him a few times at charity events. Marcus Webb's son ran away? Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. David wrote that after his mother died, his father became obsessed with work, barely spoke to him. He felt invisible in his own home. So he ran away to see if anyone would even notice. He wanted to know if anyone in the world would help him when he had nothing, when he couldn't offer them anything in return. And I did. I took him in because he needed help, not knowing he came from money. She wiped her eyes. He said he was leaving the cash to help with Tommy, but he was going back home because he finally understood that kindness exists. He said I taught him that people can be good without expecting anything back. Richard felt something crack open inside his chest. Here was Maria, earning perhaps a tenth of what he spent on car insurance each year, and she'd taken in 2 children without hesitation. She'd shared the little she had while he lived alone in a mansion, surrounded by unused bedrooms and silence. But Mr. Chen, I don't know what to do about Tommy, Maria continued. I called social services this morning. They're coming this afternoon to take him. He'll go into the system. I wanted to keep him, but I can't afford a lawyer to navigate fostering or adoption. I make $700 a week. After rent and bills, there's barely anything left. David's money will help, but it won't be enough for legal fees and everything Tommy needs long term. I brought him here because I have to work, and I couldn't leave him alone. And she dissolved into tears. Tommy looked up at Richard with eyes that had seen too much for 7 years. It's okay, the boy said softly. Maria tried. That's more than most people do. Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, the sharp clarity of knowing exactly what needed to happen next. Maria, take the day off, paid. Actually, take the week. I'm calling my lawyer right now. He pulled out his phone. We're going to make sure Tommy stays with you. I'll cover all the legal fees for emergency fostering and then adoption if that's what you want. And we're getting you moved into a bigger place where you have room for him. Maria's eyes widened. Mr. Chen, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Actually, I'm insisting. He was already dialing. My lawyer is the best in the state. If social services comes today, you tell them you have legal representation, and the process is already underway. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard did more than hire lawyers. He found Maria a 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood near good schools. He set up a trust to cover Tommy's education and expenses. But more importantly, he started spending time with them. He'd arrive at Maria's new place with pizza, sitting on the floor because the furniture hadn't been delivered yet, listening to Tommy talk about his day at his new school. The boy was smart, funny, and slowly beginning to believe that stability could be real. Richard also reached out to Marcus Webb. The billionaire had been frantically searching for his son, hiring private investigators, blaming himself. When David returned home with a new understanding of human goodness, Marcus had been trying to rebuild their relationship. The 2 fathers met for coffee, 2 wealthy men who'd learned the same lesson from opposite directions. Marcus had realized that success meant nothing if you lost connection with the people who mattered. Richard realized that wealth was meaningless if you didn't use it to create real change. 3 months later, the adoption was finalized. Richard attended the courthouse ceremony, watching Maria officially become Tommy's mother. The boy wore new clothes, but more importantly, he wore a smile that reached his eyes. He'd gained 15 pounds of healthy weight, and his report card showed straight A's. At the celebration dinner that night, Tommy asked Richard why he'd helped them. Richard thought about it carefully. Because Maria reminded me what really matters. She had almost nothing but gave everything. That's not something you can buy or build. That's human goodness in its purest form. And I had the resources to help, but wasn't using them. You both taught me that wealth without purpose is just numbers on a screen. Maria had started a foundation with Richard's support, helping other struggling families find housing and legal assistance. David visited sometimes, bringing supplies and volunteering. The boy who'd tested humanity's kindness now spent his time trying to spread it. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when we open our eyes to the struggles right in front of us. Maria saw children who needed help and didn't calculate whether she could afford it. She just acted. And that simple choice created ripples that changed multiple lives. Richard had been living in isolation, using work as armor against loneliness, never realizing that connection and purpose were waiting just beyond his front door. Tommy found a real home, not because someone pitied him, but because someone valued him. True kindness doesn't wait for perfect circumstances or abundant resources. It shows up in the moment someone needs it, offering whatever we have to give. And when we act from that place of genuine compassion, We don't just change other people's lives. We transform our own. We remember what it means to be human, to be connected, to matter in someone else's story. Richard's mansion is still large, but it's no longer empty. Tommy stays there on weekends sometimes, filling the space with laughter. Maria works there still, but now as a friend rather than just an employee. And every time Richard looks at them, he remembers the morning his housekeeper arrived, with a child and a story that shattered his understanding of what truly makes someone rich. If Maria's courage to help when she had so little inspired you, share your own story of kindness in the comments. Every act matters, no matter how small it seems. Together we can remind each other that compassion is the greatest currency we possess.